Welcome back. My name is Kanaye, and I'm bringing you another episode of the Crossover U podcast brought to you, as always, on the Crossover Media Network. So, last night we got to see two super competitive games of the State Farm Champions Classic played in Atlanta. At least for the second game, we got a much better atmosphere than what we saw when the Jayhawks and Spartans played each other. Lots of Kentucky and Duke fans bringing the energy. It was just a really great environment for a game this early in the season. And again, yeah, there's two really competitive games, both down to the wire, largely for the most part. And we got to see number one Kansas take down Michigan State, and then major upset with number 19 Kentucky beating number six Duke, marking the first big win of the Mark Pope era in Lexington. So there was a lot we were able to see out of these teams last night. And without further ado, let's not waste any more time and get into some of the reactions I had from what I was able to take away from the games last night. So, beginning with the game between Kansas and Michigan State, Bill Self took home his 561st win, passing the legendary Fog Allen for most wins by a head coach in Kansas history. This game was largely highlighted by Hunter Dickinson going off for a 28-point double-double. Yeah, it's your fifth-year senior, 3 or 4-time All-American, just a game where you pretty much played through him and bank on him trying to lead you to a win. You also did get some contributions from Zeke Mayo, but rather this time more as a playmaker. In the last two games Kansas played, he really lit it up shooting wise. And this was his actual first start. This is actually his first start of the season as he came off the bench in the first two games. He took David Coyte's spot in the starting lineup last night. And yeah, I mean, I think it was really good. I think if you're a Kansas fan, to be able to see Zeke Mayo being able to attack closeout, to do some things going towards the basket, making passes to cutters, getting the ball into the post. Obviously, you know what he brings as a shooter. And for him to be able to kind of read the defense a little bit more and make the right reads and kind of use his shooting. Of course, he's a good shooter, but being able to use the threat of his shooting as a method of being able to get other guys involved, I think was huge. You know, he did play point guard last year at South Dakota State. So I think it was really good to see that he can bring that to the table for this Kansas team. Other than that, you didn't really see many other contributions. Badinga had a pretty good game. You know, Bill Self has raved all about how he thinks Flory has a chance to be a special player. And up to this point, he's done some really great things for them with his rim protection, being able to get a lot of blocks. I think for me, what seemed most worrisome for Kansas across their game last night, and especially against North Carolina last Friday, is how much they foul. I mean, UNC shot 30 free throws in their game on Friday, and Michigan State got a lot of chances at the line last night, too. So I think being able to defend on the perimeter and in the lane without fouling is going to be something they really need to address going forward. Um, I just think at times this Kansas team gets a little too comfortable. Just going back to the UNC game, how they were up 20 and they were never really able, and they were up 20 on UNC and they allowed them to get back in the game, especially towards the end. And last night against Michigan State, they were never really able to fully pull away until like the very end. And I mean, they gave up a lot of open shots too. And you know, they just happened to get lucky that Tom Izzo's crew couldn't hit the side of a barn last night. And I mean, if Michigan State Michigan State played them really tough. Don't get me wrong, but this I would have thought should have been more of a comfortable win for Kansas. And you know, I just think I understand with a quick turnaround, it's hard having played Friday and then having to go and play in this Champions Classic, traveling to Atlanta. I understand the turnaround's tough to be fully locked in and you know prepared, but you know then again, you're playing for both stuff. You're playing at Kansas. You know that should be expected. I think to be able to win this game a little bit more comfortably than how they did. I just think it's a matter of effort. Um, you know, throughout the games, across these last two games, it's pretty evident that there seems to be a little bit of a they seem to have a little bit of an issue with playing too content, a little too comfortable. There's just times, especially defensively, where it maybe seems as if the effort isn't always there. You know, Bill Self kind of talked about this in the preseason after some of their preseason scrimmages and exhibitions, where you know he'd like to see a little bit more out of AJ Storr in terms of the effort he brings and how he maybe thought that he didn't get the right read on him when he was first recruiting him in the transfer portal. And you know, he talked again preseason about how he knows AJ Store is a capable player, capable scorer, but he wants him to try to improve in other aspects of the game, such as being able to pick guys up full court and try to crash the offensive glass or get in more on the boards. And he understands he has a very talented roster, but I think he's looking for guys to do a little bit more in other areas that they haven't necessarily always been relevant in, and also maybe areas which they lacked the desire to want to be able to contribute. Um, and yeah, I mean, that was a concern going into the season for this Kansas team, at least for me, where of course, again, this roster head to toe is probably the best probably best in the country. But I think, you have a lot of guys who are big, had big roles. AJ Store being the leading scorer for a Wisconsin team last year, and Rylan Griffin coming from a Final Four Alabama team where he averaged double figures, and Zeke Mayo being one of the best scorers in the portal, and of course Hunter Dickinson being a 3 4 time All American, Dwan Harris being one of the best winners in the sport. But I just think it was just a concern to see like if these guys can really play together. And I'm sure Bill Self will figure it out. He's a really great coach, and I know he'll always find ways to put his guys in the best position. But I just think that Kansas is at their best when they don't need Hunter Dickinson to go out and have to score as much as he had to last night for them to win against a Michigan State team that, you never want to count out Tom Izzo. Have to give him the benefit of the doubt. Really good coach. His teams always play tough. But, you know, I think Kansas is in their best chance to succeed, especially going into March when Hunter Dickinson doesn't have to be the big time scorer, where he can get other guys involved and they don't have to directly play through the post. Um, Another thing that concerns me is the lack of shooting that this Kansas roster might have. I mean, going into the season, you see they get Rylan Griffin, you see they get Zeke Mayo, AJ Store, David Coit was also a very underrated pickup, and he's played good and he played well in the first 2 games. But last night, I mean, Kansas really couldn't shoot the ball. They really had to play through Hunter Dickinson, just to reiterate. But what worries me is you have Zeke Mayo and Rylan Griffin on the floor. Say one of those guys, say there was a night like last night where both those guys' shots really aren't falling. It really clogs things up for Kansas. They're not able to run their stuff as precise, as crisply as I think Bill Self would like to, because DeJuan Harris, you don't really need a guard. Of course, if you go under on a screen, you give him that much space, he's going to shoot it. And, he's a fairly decent open shot shooter. But, DeJuan Harris and KJ Adams, those are two guys who, you really don't need to worry about in terms of shooting the ball. And Hunter Dickinson, he'll shoot, maybe 1 to 2, at most maybe three-pointers in a game. But outside of those two, if your shooters aren't able to hit shots, then that's just going to clog the lanes up for Kansas in terms of trying to get a good level of play from Hunter Dickinson, KJ Adams, and DeJuan Harris isn't really out there to score. He's a facilitator. He's a floor general. That's not his role. That's not what he's there to do. So, I think as the season goes on, again, it's really early. Nothing's set in stone at all at this point. But I think as the season goes on, I think you will see a much better improvement from the shooting. And, I just think, especially after last year, how they lack the shooting and the depth needed to be able to go on a run in March. They have that on paper this year, and it's just about getting guys to buy in and play together overall. So as for Michigan State, the bottom line was they couldn't hit shots. If they were able to hit their threes, which a lot of them were good shots, they were open shots. They just couldn't. Again, they couldn't hit the side of the barn last night. But if they hit them, they probably have a really good chance of winning this game. And I personally do think they win this game if they hit their shots. I do give Tom Izzo a lot of credit, though. He put his guys in a really good chance to win this game. Um, really good position to make this game competitive when it probably had no business being competitive. From what I saw last night, Jeremiah Fears and Jace Walker both played really, really well. I think Jace Walker is definitely going to be someone to watch out for the rest of the season. And I think the big thing was I think you would have liked to see a better game from Jaden Atkins being their leading scorer coming back from last year. Kohler also had another big game following his previous one. He contributed a nice scoring output last night. But I definitely think this is a game they can build on. It was definitely encouraging to see them hang with the number one team in the country, despite how badly they shot the ball from the perimeter. And I mean, Tom Izzo is one of the best coaches in the sport. He's going to figure this roster out. Again, I know really isn't the greatest roster he constructed for the season, especially shooting wise. I mean, it's been that way the last 2 years. But if they're able to hit shots, I think they could have a really solid year in the Big Ten and make a tournament appearance. Um, it just comes down to Jaden Atkins being able to get going and, again, being able to hit your shots. Jeremiah Fears and Jace Walker both really good going to the basket last night, and I definitely think they're both going to have big years for the Spartans. But, I think you need a little bit more bench production too. I understand Cohen Carr. There's limitations with the shooting, but I think he benefits most when the game is played more up and down, and I think that's something Tom Izzo has to look out for going forward in their games coming up. I think if they're able to try to play the game to their style, run in transition, getting guys open lanes in transition, I think that'll be their best chance for this to be competitive this year. So now let's talk about the bigger game of the night, Duke taking on Kentucky. And what a win it was for Mark Pope and this new look Kentucky program. As you guys know in the preseason overview, I did with Josh. I mentioned that I was a believer in this Kentucky team, and I'm definitely feeling really, really good about that take now. It was a huge step in the right direction for the future of this program, I think. And getting back to playing not only winning basketball, but a style of basketball I think Wildcat fans have been longing to see for a long time in the last few years when Coach Cal was there. I think just the way Mark Pope is able to get his guys to buy in, I think was really evident. Um, just being able to, I mean, it really showed the maturity of the roster he put together, really showed in the final minutes of that game. Being able to, make a surge late. Andrew Carr had those two really, really huge and ones in transition and in the post. And I think just being able to play really solid defense on Duke in those final few minutes was huge. And that's definitely going to be something that's really, really big in what they can build on going forward for this year. And just to go back to that preseason overview, I do think Kentucky ends up having a better year than Coach Cal does at Arkansas. Again, it's early, nothing set in stone, but that's just my take. I'm just not a believer in Cal. I don't think he's going to change. Yes, he's at a new school, and there's always going to be more hype building around when you're in a new place and building a new team. But I mean, I largely just think that what he did at Kentucky is just going to transfer over to Arkansas, where he targets these really highly recruited 5-star guys, and it's basically just a year to prepare them to go to the NBA. But again, let's get back to Kentucky. Mark Pope was the star of the night, and I just think the amount of support he has from the Kentucky fans going into this year it's great. I think Kentucky fans just love being able to breathe this breath of fresh air, and having a new coach that he's there to win. Mark Pope is there to win. He's got the endorsement for Rick Pitino, and he won at Kentucky. He knows what it means to win in Lexington, and I think him being able to instill that in his players, not only this year but going forward, I think is really going to set up to have a really good run at Kentucky. So just to talk a little bit more about the game last night, one problem I do notice about Kentucky is they really lack a true point guard. I know Lamont Butler tends to play the one for them at certain points of the game, but I just think it's going to be really tough for them if they don't have they have comfortable ball handlers. There's nothing that they have guys who can handle the ball. I think it comes down more to being able to be a smarter playmaker and being able to have a guy who you can run your sets through, not necessarily for, but being able to have a guy to run your sets through. Jackson Robinson doesn't. That's not his game. Lamont Butler, yes, he's a veteran and he's one of the smartest players, really great defender, but I just don't think that's necessarily his game either. So I think that's definitely going to be something to watch going forward for this Kentucky team. If they're able to have someone emerge as kind of that true floor general, I think that is going to be huge for them. And I think they could maybe even, go on a little bit of a run in March if they get that figured out. In terms of like overall though, you know, Otega Owe, really great player defensively, and then you also have Lamont Butler, great defender, and I mean Kobe Bryant can shoot the lights out. That guy is legit. There's some questions about him that I've seen people have coming from the mid-major level playing at Dayton, how his shooting would translate to playing at the high major level, especially at a school like Kentucky, where he shot almost 50% from three last year. I think a lot of people were wondering if that was really necessarily going to translate, him being able to shoot at that high of a level at the high major level. And up to this point, he's done it. I mean, that guy can really shoot the ball. And I think what I noticed last night, they need to do more to be able to get him open and to be able to get shots, to be able to get him shots. Because I mean, like there were several points throughout the game where Kentucky couldn't buy a basket, and they were able to get it out to Brea, and he hits a huge three to give him a little bit of momentum to get back in the game. And I think that's going to be something that that Mark Pope needs to definitely look into going forward. I mean, I'm sure he knows it, and I'm sure we will see more sets designed specifically just to get Kobe Bryant open. But I think what was really great was being able to see Andrew Carr, the performance he had. I mean, that was largely unexpected for me going into the game. I going into the game, I thought it was going to be, if they won the game, it was going to be because of Jackson Robinson. He had a really quiet game, and I think you're definitely going to want to see more out of him going forward. But I think as if you're a Kentucky fan, that's good that you're able to beat a top 10 team without one of your main guys really being able to produce anything for you offensively last night. So I think that was I think that's something that they can definitely build on, where you're able to win games even when one of your main guys isn't able to hit his shots. And it's not always going to be like that. Jackson Robinson's a really good player. He played really well at BYU last year for Mark Pope, and I think he's going to be able to have some big games this year for them. But yeah, going forward, I think you definitely would like to see more out of him. And then going back to Andrew Carr, again, a little unexpected performance from him last night. But I mean, if he can do that on a consistent basis, then that is just going to be absolutely huge for this Wildcat team. And yeah, I mean, overall, I think Mark Pope was the star of the night. Huge win early in his Kentucky career, and I definitely think the Wildcats will be having a good year this season. So, despite the loss, the Duke freshmen looked like the real deal, with Flag, Kneppel, and Common Malach combining for nearly 50 points, I believe. Um, it was, I think I wasn't necessarily sure if I believed the Duke freshmen were going to be this good this early in the season, but they've definitely made me a believer. Kneppel can shoot the lights out. That guy is one of the smartest freshmen I think I've ever watched play up to this point. Uh, I almost want to say I think he might be. I think he might end up being better than Reed Shepard. Just his, he's really smart in when being able to go towards the basket and be able to make reads where he's able to make that little short jumper he likes, or being able to dish it off in the post like we saw last night, where he took it to the basket, hit the Kentucky defender with a pump fake, and dumped it down to Kama and Malach for a nice dunk. And I mean, I think what you're going to see from him all year long is someone who's really just like a guy you can trust. I mean, that guy, he really plays with no fear. He looks way more mature for playing college basketball for someone who's a freshman. And I mean, I think he's going to be really, really important for this Duke team. I think overall, if he's able to shoot it consistently as he has up to this point in the 3 games they played, or 4 games, if not positive, I believe it's been 3 games, then I think it's just going to be huge for this Duke team. In terms of Flag, Flag looks like the real deal. We know he's probably going to end up being the number one pick in the NBA draft. And I mean, he put up 26 points last night in his first big time game of his college career. And I think he's met the expectations coming in. I mean, he's played really well. He's shown in the 2 games prior that he doesn't necessarily need to score to be able to be a big contributor. He's able to get in on the glass, play good defense, get other guys the balls, put them in good positions to score. But I mean, last night that he showed you he could go get you a bucket when you need him to. That wasn't until the final 2 minutes of the game or my mistake, the final minute of the game where game was tied, and Duke had the chance to take the lead, and Cooper Flag brought the ball up and ended up turning it over, dribbling into a double team. And then, obviously Kentucky comes down, they get the foul, they hit the two free throws. Duke comes down with the ball. Flag brings it up again with a chance to tie the game. Flag dribbles into the corner, which obviously is one of the biggest things you shouldn't do, and ends up turning the ball over. So again, Cooper Flag has been stellar up to this point, and he looks like the early pick for. He should be the early pick for freshman of the year. If you didn't have him as freshman of the year, I don't know necessarily what you were thinking, but Cooper Flag looks like he's the real deal. He will be the number one pick in the draft, but you have to remember he's a freshman, and that final sequence of events for him, he looked very much like a freshman. He's going to make those mistakes. It's early. It was his first big time game in his college career. And, it's just going to be something he can learn from. But obviously, it was Flag who made the mistake on the court. But I honestly blame this loss more so on John Shire. I understand there was no timeout at hand, which they could have used to draw something up. But I would have rather, I'm sure they could have ran some sort of set where you have Tyrese Proctor with the ball in his hands. And I mean, you had a guy who was lighting up all night in Knappel. And even if you want to go to Flag, I wouldn't necessarily bring the ball up to him because help defense is coming because they know he's one of the best players in the country. And, you know, they're not going to let him go one-on-one for the game when he's been scoring all night. I think if you're able to run a set, if you're able to bring the ball up with Tyrese Proctor and run a set to get a guy a shot, whether it's Knappel, Flag, maybe someone like a Caleb Foster, I think that would have been a lot better. And I just don't necessarily think I really just didn't like John Shire's late game management. And I think, I'm not necessarily the biggest believer in John Shire. I think my mind always goes back to last year in the NCAA tournament, the Elite Eight against NC State. I understand NC State was the hottest team in the country at that point, but there is no way that Duke team should have lost the game to NC State. But that's what ended up happening. And you can talk about the recruiting all you want, and I understand there's a lot of pressure on him for one, being the head coach at Duke, and then also being in the shadow of Coach Krzyzewski. But until I see it, I don't know if I'm necessarily a believer in John Shire being able to win the big games. But I mean, yeah, it wasn't. I just think I understand there was a few guys went down. You had Common Malach cramping up several times throughout the game, especially late in the game, which they would have needed. They could have used the rim protection he brings. And then obviously Sion James getting hit with a shoulder injury. I think that was a major blow to them. But I think another thing I noticed too is they really don't have much bench production, and I think you need someone to emerge. Whether it's someone like a Sion James. I understand he got hurt last night, but up to that point he didn't necessarily have the best game. If you can have someone like that, or maybe a Mason Gillis, or if you can get a little bit more scoring out of maybe a Malik Brown, which I understand that's not his role there. He's there to defend. But you need someone. I think they need another guy to emerge, someone who could come off the bench and give them a little bit more of a scoring output. Because if you just solely rely on the freshmen, your younger players, to be able to carry the load, it's a lot to ask for. And I just don't think that puts Duke in a great position. I do think they win the ACC this year, but come March, I just don't know if they still don't have a guy that's emerged as a guy who can come off the bench and create instant offense for you. I just don't think that's a great recipe for being able to go far in March. And, overall, I think this is going to be a learning experience for Shire, and it's definitely going to be a learning experience for Cooper Flag. I'm sure next game he'll bounce back and probably even have a better game than what he did prior to that final minute of the game. But, I think he just needs to learn that maybe you don't necessarily, because everyone knows that you're going to be trying to take that shot. I think if you're able to stay a little more in control in terms of going to the basket and maybe trying to look for someone to hit a dump off like he had, or even when that initial drive he took when Otega always stripped the ball from him, you had Concanepo out on the wing ready to shoot it, and I would have dished out to him with how he'd been playing that night. But again, it's a learning experience. He's a freshman. He's going to make freshman mistakes, and that's just what it was last night. It was a really hard fought game, and ultimately Kentucky won. Big one for Mark Pope, star of the night. And overall, I think that's going to take care of all my reactions. That's going to cover all my reactions I had for this State Farm Champions Classic last night. Really great event, and I really hope that the producers of this event are able to put together another great Champions Classic again next year. Hopefully, bring in a few other teams, maybe Indiana, maybe a UConn. I know Gonzaga hasn't won a national championship, but it'd be pretty cool to see Gonzaga in an event like this. But yeah, I mean, it was really great. Atmosphere was, at least for the second game, not as much as the first game. The atmosphere was really good, and I mean, it's got me fired up to see these beginning of the season tournaments starting coming up in the next few weeks. So yeah, that covers everything for this episode today. If you liked what you see, if you're a big college basketball fan, please share this with your friends, get more people to watch. All helps with the algorithm and trying to get more people to watch. And until then, I'll see you all next time.